Good afternoon. I want to welcome all of you to the afternoon plenary. My name is Kyo Kim. I'm the Executive Director of CTRL. Thank you. I hope all of you had inspiring and informative morning session. I was able to drop in on several of the sessions. It was great to hear and see so many of you engaged in some substantive and passionate discussions. I found them energizing, and I hope you feel the same way. I know all of you are looking forward to the afternoon plenary, but before we get to that, please allow me to once again recognize and thank some of the people who made this event terrific and possible. I first want to thank Mary Clark, my boss, who has been a steadfast supporter of the work of the CTRL, so thank you, Mary. I would be remiss if I didn't also thank Lisa Leff, who served as the acting DAA until recently and also championed the work of CTRL. I want to thank the faculty fellows, the CTRL faculty fellows who reviewed all of the session proposals and helped shape today's conference. Faculty fellows, if you are in the room here and in the tavern, and if you can hear me, please stand up to be recognized. One. Betsy, thank you very much. I also want to thank the Office of Sustainability for making this event a zero-waste event. So thank you. And finally, I want to express my deepest appreciation for the CTRL team. For all their work on the conference today and the work that happens throughout the year. Can you either stand or raise your hands if you're in the room or elsewhere to be appreciated? Thank you, thank you. And please bear with me for just a couple more minutes because I want to share some numbers with you. The first number is 515. That is the total number of registrants for this conference. We estimate that around 420 of you actually showed up, realizing that school starts on Monday. So thank you all for coming. The second number I want to share with you is 502. This is the number of you who responded to the faculty needs survey. This was a tremendous return. We were really gratified at the number of people who participated in the survey from all different faculty types. And so we have, I think, a pretty good representation of the concerns and interests of the faculty. Over the course of the spring semester, we will do a deep dive into the data and report back out to you with what we find in the data set. All right, and finally, these were the award winners for the Faculty Needs Survey. Richard Benedetto from the Department of Government, Michael Keynes from the Office of Graduate Studies, and Hannah Park from the library. They will be having lunch with 3 of their colleagues at the University Club on behalf of CTRL. No joke, when this random drawing was happening, I was actually selected as one of the winners. I had to give it up. So instead of just taking 3 of my colleagues to lunch, I decided that I would have lunch for and with you today. So you're welcome. And so with that, I would like to ask Mary Clark to come up.
Thank you, Kehoe, and thank you to all of the CTRL staff and all of the CTRL faculty fellows. The faculty fellows are new this year and really a great innovation from Kehoe. So thank you for your leadership, Kehoe, and thank you to all of the faculty fellows for your leadership. Well, it is my particular pleasure to introduce President Sylvia Burwell, who will be leading a distinguished group of faculty today for our luncheon keynote on the scholar-teacher ideal. As you know, President Burwell joined AU as our 15th president in June of 2017. a graduate of Harvard University and the University of Oxford. President Burwell brought a wealth of professional experience with her when she joined us. As you know, she served as Secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Director of the Office of Management and Budget, both under President Barack Obama, and has held senior leadership positions at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and at the Walmart Foundation. President Burwell has a track record of confronting complex domestic and global challenges. Ebola comes to mind, Zika comes to mind, and the last government shutdown. Next up is tackling the rollout of our strategic plan. That will seem, hopefully, easier by comparison. Thank you, Sylvia, for inspiring this year's Anne Farron Conference theme, which, as you know, is the "and" thing, an explicit reference to research and teaching, and that will serve as the theme for our Luncheon Plenary. So thank you for joining us and for facilitating the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, and I guess I'm unhappy to report that the shutdown that I oversaw used to be the second longest shutdown in the nation's history, and that has been surpassed. And as I said, I'm sorry that has happened, and I'm very appreciative and thankful for all of you all who in this room participated in the event we did here at American University, where over 500 of our federal colleagues signed up and came to the university to have a day of learning and a day to be able for them to do some professional and personal development at a time that's difficult. And thank you also to our athletics department. We're still going there. Our athletics department is offering any federal employee who brings their ID free entry into any of our games. And tomorrow we will be playing Army. We just beat Navy. Is that, I'm looking, yes. We just beat Navy. Our men and women just beat Navy in basketball, and we'll be playing Army. And the other thing, for any of you who have children, it is the day, tomorrow is the day that across the nation we honor the history of some female athletes, and there's a special day where there will be programs and clinics after the game for your kids to learn skills. So just a little add to what all we're doing on here at American during this time. Mary, thank you for the introduction. And Kehoe, thank you for helping to make this incredible event possible. I too want to thank the CTRL team, and I actually was going to ask everyone to stand who understood the reference of that picture, but I will not do that. And then you would get bonus points if you could do the song. There was a man named Brady. There's a story about a man named Brady. Very good, Mary. Showing her true scholarship. I want to thank the CTRL faculty fellows. Thank you all, as Mary and Kehoe said, an important addition. And I also want to say thank you to our namesake of this conference, and thank you so much for your generosity, for being here, for being a motivational part of what we do in so many ways. So thank you. Want to thank Jack Cassell, who is here with us today. Jack, thank you for being with us and recognizing the importance of what we do here with faculty. Jack's up from Florida, is here today as part of this, but has already even met with a student today to hear more from our students as well. So Jack, thank you for all you do. And Mary, want to thank you. Our interim provost, and you've served for many years, our dean of academic affairs, support for this conference, helping make it happen. But also, I really want to take a moment to thank you for your years of service at this university, and especially for your most recent service, and for your support of our faculty, our students, our staff, and all that you have done during your time as a member of this AU family. During this special time, you've kept us with momentum during a quite challenging time when you think that Mary's the interim provost, started this when we were in the middle of the strategy process, as we have begun the budget process. Some of the hardest things that we do here at the university, Mary kind of took over and has done this without us skipping a beat. And she did it and has done it in a way that I think has embraced the idea of partnership, both with the faculty, the students, the teams, the deans, and across. So I really do want to just take a minute and say, for all of us, to say thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary. And I do want to add one special introduction today. His first day is technically Tuesday, but I think he's joining us today because he actually knows how important this day is for us as a university, and because I'm already happy that he gets the concept, once an Eagle, always an Eagle, so he's here to start early. Appreciate that. And I want to introduce our new provost. And prior to joining AMU, Dan Myers served as Marquette University's provost and executive vice president for academic affairs. Before that, he was Notre Dame's vice president and associate provost for faculty affairs. He's a distinguished scholar in the field of sociology and actually has a wealth of experience in student life as well as his academic experience. He has experience in academic affairs, and he has a record of significant accomplishments in strong faculty relations and issues of diversity and inclusion. And I think part of what happened in the entire process, we came to know about Dan's excitement and enthusiasm for our strategy and the things that we as a university believe we should be doing and are committed to doing and who we are. And so I'm thrilled to welcome Dan Myers as American University's new provost and chief academic officer. If everyone could welcome Dan. And I thought it would be great if Dan could just come up and say hello so everybody can see and start to get to know Dan.
Thank you, thank you. It's so great to be here at American. It's so great to be here today. I'm so impressed that in January, before class, a week before classes start, that this many of you come out to be a part of an event like this. It just says a world about what you care about investing in yourselves and your students and the community that you have. It just means everything to me to see that coming in the door. So I'm just really happy to be here. You've all been so welcoming, and I just cannot wait to get started and work with all of you. I know we're going to have a great time together, and we're going to get wonderful things done. So thank you.
So I'm excited to join you all to have a discussion today about a mix that is for American University as ubiquitous as red, white, and blue. And I am referring to a community-wide feature of our university, and that is the scholar-teacher ideal in terms of what we're going to be discussing today on a panel. And while today's schedule is actually filled with different kinds of learning, it was great to see all the different things. Our luncheon is going to focus today on that particular topic, and it's the topic of both scholarship and teaching. And as I have said, and as I said in my inauguration, we are a university of and, not or. And this idea connects directly to major points in our upcoming strategic plan. And I do want to stop on that note and actually thank a number of folks, particularly who have been involved in the creation of that and were part of the Strategic Planning Committee. And if you hear your name and you're here, please actually stand. And I know Pat is here. Professor Pat Ofterheide. Pat, you're here. I saw you somewhere. Yeah, there's Pat. From SOC. Professor Derek Coburn from SIS and COGOD. Don't know if Derek's here or in one of the other rooms. Professor Dave Marcotte from SBA, and Professor Simon Nicholson from SIS, and Professor Brenda Smith from the Washington College of Law. And I wanted us to just thank these folks who dedicated a year's worth of time to helping us get to where we are. So you'll hear more about the strategic plan in the coming days. The actual official rollout is Tuesday, but the good news is that this is no big reveal. because we've been working on it, and we've been working on it together as a university. So you'll see things, you can read it all and that sort of thing. And I think so many of you all have participated from the sessions at the schools that I've done and others have done, to cross-cutting sessions where we had different groups of people coming together, to the work that actually was done at the conference last year. I don't know if you all remember Mission, Vision, Values work that we were working on last year when we were here at the Ann Faring Conference. And so the strategy is fundamentally a product of who we are and what we do and what we're going to do. And it uses our strengths to help us chart a course into the future. And part of that we're going to be discussing just now, and it's the idea of being a university of and, not or. It relates to a number of elements that you see throughout the strategy, whether that's working as a community, whether that's how we're going to focus on increasing our externally funded research, whether that's about continuing to attract the highest quality faculty, students, and staff, whether that's related to the question of the student experience. And I think that the idea of and is also related to inclusion, and the idea that when we come together, we're stronger, and it's a sense of belonging and inclusion that we believe is a prerequisite to excellence as a university. So the idea of and is about all of us and so many of the elements of our strategic plan. And that's why I'm very happy to welcome some members of our faculty community to shine a little more light on this and thing. And we're joined by a very thoughtful group of panelists today from our faculty who have addressed this in their own work. And so let me introduce our panelists today. Professor Laura DeNardis from our School of Communications. Professor, come on up and let's all have a seat. Professor Angela Davis from Washington College of Law. Professor Anthony Riley from our Department of Psychology and the College of Arts and Sciences. And Professor Núria Vilanova, an associate professor in our Department of World Languages and Cultures in the College of Arts and Sciences. Thank you, thank you. We will pass between, Laura. So I'm going to do some questions to start us off, and then we're going to open this up as an opportunity for the community to ask questions and come to what you all want to talk about as well. So I'll kind of kick us off with a few questions, and then we will open it up to everyone. And I think we'll probably do that probably right around, we'll probably go for close to 30 minutes of moderated Q&A, and then open it up for another about 30 minutes of questions from everyone here. So we're going to start with the question that I want to start in terms of a place that we'll begin. And the scholar-teacher ideal is among the centerpieces, as I just discussed, of what AU offers to both faculty and students whom we want to recruit. And how have each of you incorporated that ideal or interpreted that ideal during your time at AU? And I think we have folks with different periods of time at AU. And why don't we start? Actually, Angela, if you don't mind, can we start with you?
So how have I personally incorporated the ideal of the scholar teacher? Mm-hmm. So in the legal academy, I'm from the law school, everybody, and so our work is seen as, there are three aspects to our work: scholarship, teaching, and service, all three of those. And how have I incorporated it? I would say that I'm fortunate in that, unlike some law professors, I'm actually teaching in the area in which I also write. And that's not always the case, actually, in the legal academy. Mm-hmm. And so for me, the goal of scholarship for me, and I think everybody has a different idea of scholarship. I think not everybody writes for the same purpose. And that's especially true in the legal academy. For me, I came to the academy as a second career. I started out as a public defender, a practicing criminal lawyer. And so I came to the academy because I wanted to explore through my scholarship many of the issues and problems that I saw in the criminal justice system as a practicing lawyer. And so that drove me in terms of what I wanted to do with my scholarship. And I think scholars have different goals. And not everybody, I mean, some people they write to explore and expand and develop ideas within their field among other scholars, and that's a very important ideal. For me, mine was more outward looking in terms of me using my scholarship as a tool to affect change in the criminal justice system, particularly criminal justice reform. And so that was my goal, and I am fortunate enough to be at a law school who supported me in that goal through my scholarship. And as I said, I'm fortunate to be teaching in that same field. And so I always strive to bring my scholarship into the classroom and share it with my students through my teaching. I always try to incorporate it, and I've been able to incorporate it in that way. And so that's basically how I have pursued the scholar-teacher ideal. I think for me, and I know we're going to talk about some of these other issues later on, I think some professors are more driven by their scholarship, some are more driven by their teaching. For me, I'm driven by both. At various points in time in my career as a law professor, I've had to focus on one or the other for various reasons that I hope we'll have an opportunity to discuss later on. But I just feel very fortunate to be in an institution that supports me in my own personal goals of teaching and scholarship. And I don't think that's true at every institution.
Thank you. Núria, why don't we come to you next?
Yes, sure. Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. It's an honor. And I would like to say that the way I interpret it for myself, it might be a bit different from the way I interpret it in general. So in general, I interpret it as a common effort. The scholar and teacher is a common effort, no matter where you are. I mean, we could be thinking about a sphere of knowledge, having different entities, one being teaching and the other one being a scholarship, and whether you are somebody pushing the boundaries, of knowledge through your scholarship, or you are somebody just, disseminating that the scholarship through your teaching, we are all in the same effort. We are all part of the same kind of enterprise. So the way I interpret it is very holistic, and I think it's very inclusive of everybody, wherever you are in that sphere of knowledge. In my own case, I would just say the same as you said in a way, is that I feel quite privileged because I had it quite easy. Because in a way, when I came to AU, I came with already a few years of career, I would say about about almost 15, so 12, 13, about 15. And I had been in many other institutions. I had been doing research as well as teaching. And when I came here, I kept doing my research. And it just happened that my research and my teaching met many times, and they both inspired each other. So, sometimes I was able to draw my research into my teaching, but the other way around also has been remarkable. And my last project was inspired by a course that I was offered when I came. The Latin American cinema class in 2009 has inspired my last project, which is hopefully a book that will come up hopefully quite soon. So
We hope so too.
no pressure now, huh? I've just said it. So yeah. Well, yes, that would be my.
Thank you. And thank you, Núria. And we're going to kind of get to some of the more challenging issues, just as I'm looking around and reading people's faces. We'll get to some of the challenging things as we're starting with the ideal and how you incorporate it. We'll be moving on to some of the things that I know are the challenges as an institution tries to live this. I think, Núria, you touched on some important concepts with the idea of viewing it as a community and how we think about that in terms of the community as a whole being able to achieve this idea. But Tony, why don't you jump in here next?
Okay. My kind of history and association with it is not as glamorous as the first two. I work with rats, and so it's I like them, but not everybody's cup of tea. I've thought
They're our
about
cup of tea. They're our cup of tea. We
Our
love
cup of
them.
tea.
We love you and your rats.
I mentioned this earlier in a session, in that I never think about the scholar-teacher ideal. It's not something that is in my head that I strive for or do. I think that it's a construct that doesn't come from me. And I think if you missed Anne's plenary this morning, you missed a wonderful talk. Anne is one of the most reasoned and wise people I know. And she defined it quite clearly to me. It's passion. And I think passion drives us. And it doesn't drive me to any specific goal. It just drives me. I love my research. I love my teaching. And so the concept of a scholar-teacher ideal to me is just simply part of, not that I've reached it, but it's just part of my nature. And I think AU is nice in the sense that it gives me the opportunity to do both.
That's great. Thank you, Tony. I was actually speaking this week at a Sons and Daughters event that I was asked to do. And I was asked, in the different roles, because as was made, the point was made, I can't seem to hold a job in terms of the different things that I've done, that, what is the one thing, if I were saying, what made people successful at HHS, at OMB, at, Walmart, at all the different places, what would be one thing? And it's so interesting, Tony, what you just said, because, I hadn't thought about the question. This was not one of those panels where you get the questions before. And so I really hadn't thought of it, but the immediate answer that came to my mind was passion. In terms of, in any of those places, what makes people successful is that they actually love it. And that love gets translated, that you have a fire in your belly for getting up and getting it done, and that makes you want to do it, and makes you want to do it better, and it makes you want to learn, and it makes you want to listen, and it makes you want to do all the things that contribute generally to success. So it's very interesting that you don't think about it as that concept, but it's the outcome of what you have in terms of passion. Laura, how do you incorporate this ideal?
I was reflecting on this question this morning, and I was thinking about how, like many of us, I went to school for more than a decade. Then I did a postdoc. No one ever once taught me how to teach in all of that time. And then I was thrown into a lecture hall with 120 engineering students and got out on the stage, and I had no idea what to do. Fast forward to the end of the semester, there was one student who visited me in office hours quite regularly. It was an older Vietnamese woman. I still remember her name. I won't share it. And she was having a terrible time with the quantitative aspects of the class. She was conditioned her entire life, I can't do math. And she was having problems with binary conversion. So I was struggling to figure out how to teach her how to do this, and I decided to get a quarter out of my pocket. And we started flipping a coin, and I told her that the zeros were the tails and the ones were the heads. And the light bulb went off in her head, and she was able to get it. And that, to me, felt better than speaking at the Royal Society. And I was hooked, and I thought, this is what I want to do for a living. And that being said, I agree. I never wake up in the morning and say, how can I incorporate the scholar-teacher ideal today? Right? That's not something that I do. What motivates my work and my teaching is a belief that I hold inside of myself, and that's that, in my area, I feel like everything of importance is now mediated in decisions over control of the internet. So that's what motivates me, and that motivates for the work that I do, and it motivates me for the teaching. Just a quick, to directly answer your question now. I'm acting like a professor here, but to directly answer your question, I incorporate it by thinking about teaching as a way to enter my scholarship and to fine-tune the messaging in my scholarship and vice versa. So for example, the first semester that I came to AU, I taught a course on global internet policy. And don't you know that that's the table of contents for the global war for internet governance that now has been translated into many languages? And I'm doing the same thing right now out of a course that I taught with one of Angela's colleagues in the law school and really enjoyed it, called Cyber Flashpoints. And we're now taking our experience there, and we're working with agents, and we want to turn that into a book that teaches a general audience about what the cyber flashpoints are of the day. So there are many answers to that. But on that last point, I don't distinguish between the teaching and research in some ways. I think about the students as leading me into questions and helping me to fine-tune my message.
That's great, thank you. We're actually honored on our panel to have several of our Scholar Teacher Awardees winners on the panel. And I think that's a really important award that we give. I think it's also important how we highlight it. And the fact that our convocation, when we are welcoming, the bookends of your college experience here at American University as an undergraduate are the convocation and graduation. But we start the convocation, I don't give a speech, the provost doesn't give a speech, it is the scholar teacher. And there is a reason that we do that in terms of our culture, who we are, what we think is important, and honoring this ideal. And so an important part and a way that we recognize this as an organization. And we're lucky enough to have a couple, but we actually have one of the first and earliest winners, Tony, sorry. And people actually gave me how long you've been at AU, but we'll just give that a skip. But I think what I would love for you to speak to, Tony, if you don't mind, is do you think there's been evolution of this concept during your time at AU? Because you can see an arc based on your time here. And do you think there's been evolution or change in either how we talk about it or how we think about the scholar-teacher ideal?
I think that's another way of saying I'm old. Is that?
I did not say that in any way, shape, or form.
I'm old.
You are experienced.
Experienced.
You are wise.
I received
there are many ways to say this.
I received the award in 2001, which is quite some time ago, and it has changed. I think the way that the expectations of faculty have dramatically changed. And and someone can correct me who's been here longer than I have, but when I was here, when I started, there were in fact very little pressure on research. People did research. We had good scholars in the department, good scholars at the university, but the dynamics for the expectations for research and scholarship have dramatically changed over the last two decades or so. Also at that time, we didn't have faculty, or if we had them, there were few, that were only teaching. The professors of the practice or the term faculty and adjuncts were pretty limited in that time. That's changed over the last several decades as well. So I think at least in terms of the way the university, and I believe a lot of this is university driven, is how hiring occurs and how roles are defined for various types of faculty. So I mentioned this earlier today at a session. In the past, we had basically professors, and those professors taught and did research with different degrees of strength. We now have a kind of a three-pronged approach at the university where we have term faculty or professors of the practice, or contingent faculty, and we have individuals who are researchers and scholars who oftentimes buy out classes, and the vast majority of us are right in that middle that make up the group that's looking for scholar teacher, that when we hire, we're really trying to bring in the best of both. And my issue with that is that not only should we do that in the recruitment, we should recruit the best, but we should work hard to maintain and continue the best by infrastructure and resources to bring people to the level that we want to have them. But I think it's been very fluid, and I think the university's perspective has been fluid on that, which drives how faculty respond.
And I think that's one of the things that we heard throughout the strategy, is making sure that elements of the strategy are there to support both the ideals. Right. And you'll see that, and for those of you that have participated, you'll see that emphasis on the support for both the research and the teaching are parts and elements of the strategy as we think about the question of, if we're going to articulate it, how do we make sure that we are providing the tools? But it also brings us to the question of, we're now shifting into the harder topics, of how we measure it. And that's something in my faculty breakfasts that generally comes up quite often in terms of the question of how we as an institution recognize and measure these things. And so one of the questions I wanted to ask all of you is, how should we measure scholarship And I know I'm opening quite a conversation. It sounds like parts of today have had parts of this conversation, but can we talk a little bit about how should we think about measuring scholarship? We'll then come to how we should measure teaching. And so want to hear from each of you. And Laura, why don't we start with you this time?
Measuring scholarship in some ways requires defining what we mean by scholarship. And I think
I'll give you go ahead.
Okay. I mean, I want to acknowledge that, and this is very important, at American University, scholarship has a very broad definition. So, for example, it could mean creative work in the arts. It means traditional research. It means professional practice and law practice. So, I just want to say that out loud, that it's so important to have that shared definition of the diverse array of scholarship, all of the things which make a difference in society. I had a conversation with someone who was involved in the CFA once about tenure guidelines. And if you may indulge me in this one story, I stopped the conversation and I said, "Would you give Bob Woodward tenure?" And the person said no. And I don't think that's right. This is someone with more than a dozen books and high impact, and so to me, for me, scholarship is about the professional practice. It's about the creative work. I don't want to live in a world without art, and it's about the research. Now, on how you measure that, given that there is such a diverse array of scholarship, it's a difficult question to answer. In the area of research, which is where I'm involved in, I think the traditional big five, the traditional measurements are still very important, like citations, awards, grants, productivity, things that revolve around peer review. I also think that we need to evolve in that area a bit to acknowledge the public impact of our work and the fact that innovation is sometimes necessary to advance knowledge. So someone who develops technological platforms and tools and software to mine big data, that's scholarship to me. Someone who is doing a lot of public interest work and testifying in front of Congress, engaging in the press a lot, that's equally important. So I think the traditional metrics matter. We also need to evolve with the evolving role of the university in society.
Thank you. Tony?
And I would concur with that as well. But I think the issue, this is certainly the toughest question to me. And because I think it's field dependent and it's oftentimes individual dependent. Many times our metrics are not metrics of outcome. They're metrics of initial assessment like SCTs, as opposed to how well that student has gone on. Are they going into the major? Are they going in and getting placements, et cetera? But what's relevant to me here is that I was on the strategic planning committee that preceded this strategic planning committee. And that was in 2007 or 2008. I can't remember exactly when that was. And we talked about the scholar-teacher combination with an "and," but it wasn't called the scholar-teacher ideal. If anybody else was on that committee, I can't remember. But what was interesting is we had clear aspirations and expectations for scholar-teacher with no criteria. And that's tough. If we're going to have the concept of a scholar-teacher ideal in terms of recruitment or in terms of production of our current faculty, we have to have metrics that are meaningful, that people know, so that it's one thing for the university to have the expectation of that, but faculty have to understand what those expectations are and how they'll be determined.
And I think that's an important part of why we're having this conversation today, and why we're going ahead and having some of the conversations about some of the tough questions. We're going to get that on the teaching side. In terms of, as we think about going forward and implementing this, how do we think about these questions of measurement of scholarship in a changing world? And I think what Laura was discussing is that the guiding principles need to be maintained in terms of how one thinks through quality measurement. But how that gets expressed may be evolving and changing as we think through it. And on the teaching side, I'm sure we're going to come to the teaching reviews when we get to that. And so how should we be thinking about it? And I think one of the things that's important for us is to model what we are expecting of our students, and that is a willingness to discuss the hard issues and to have the civil discourse and the differing points of view on these points that we all have, which is a part of what we all want to model in terms of the faculty and the staff of the university doing it. So that's part of why we're having the conversation today, is to raise things like, okay, if you want scholar-teacher ideal, what do we mean? And where do we measure it and how do we articulate it? And the place it gets articulated probably the most clearly, if not satisfactorily clearly, is probably in the tenure process, right? And so these are very, very real conversations. Núria, do you want to join in?
Yeah, I'm just going, I couldn't agree more with the two of them. They have said exactly how I feel about it. I just would add a couple of things. I think the metrics are always quite challenging, especially in certain disciplines, and let alone when you go into different kinds of scholarship, even in the traditional way when we talk about research. For instance, if you are in the humanities, the citation indexes work in a very different way from the sciences. And I want to thank in this occasion, the library here for the bibliometrics. I learned that wonderful concept because I didn't even know about it when I was trying to put my file together for my promotion to associate professor turned faculty. And I don't know how they managed to get quite a few things out of some articles that had been published in Chile, in Mexico, in Spanish, even in Catalan. I had even one thing from my, my Catalonia. And it just, those articles really had so little weight because, they were not indexed in the same way. There was this kind of hegemonic, role that English would play, which is fine, but still we need to be more nuanced and understand that even, when you are multilingual or you use more than one language, some of your research might not be even, recognized. So I just wanted to add something else. I mean, they've said it all, but this is also a point that I wanted to make.
Angela?
So how should we measure scholarship? I don't know how we should, but I know that the way that we seem to be doing it now isn't satisfactory, I will say. It seems somewhat subjective. I mean, when I think about it, I would think that a person whose scholarship has influenced the academy and inspired others in the academy and caused them to think deeply about issues and influence the work of scholars and also influence the world in general, as Laura mentioned. I mean, the question about Bob Woodward, I mean, what an influence he's been, and the notion that he wouldn't get tenure. So for me, it's that. It's scholarship that is influencing not only the academy, but is influencing the world in a positive way. But how we measure that, I don't know. I think the way we do it now is very subjective. And I speak specifically in the legal academy. There are people who write about more theoretical issues and they seem to talk to each other scholars. There are people who talk to the world and try to influence the world. And I do think people are very subjective when they're measuring scholarship, depending on their own personal biases as to which one they value. I just think it's human nature, and I think that's unfortunate. Not everyone sees scholarship as broadly as I personally think they should see it. And as I think you were talking about, Laura, I totally agree with your vision, but I don't think everybody in the academy agrees with it. And I will also say, as a woman and as a woman of color, I think people of color women and people of color face particular challenges in the academy around both scholarship and teaching, which I know we're going to get to soon. I come from a family of teachers. I have two older sisters who are professors in different fields. Well, they're both retired now, but they were professors in different fields from different schools in different parts of the country. So I came to the academy much later than they did. And the advice of one of my sisters who taught in a school in the South and who went on to just do wonderful work and be a very recognized scholar, she said to me, find out how many articles you have to write and then write one more. Because they're going to change the rules on you midstream. And so when they tell you, you need to write 3, and then in the end they tell you 4, then you can pull out that 4th one and you'll be ready. I mean, she was just sort of jaded by, her own experiences in the academy. But I do think that, I feel fortunate that being at the Washington College of Law, I did not face those issues because it's a very inclusive environment that really values different kinds of scholarship, and I didn't face those challenges. But I think in the academy in general, I do think that, that gender and race play a role. And I'll just leave it at that. Maybe we can talk more about that in the Q&A.
Angela, thank you. And I think we're going to switch to the teaching part. I want to give everybody a 5-minute warning because we'll open it up to your all's questions. You may want to be thinking about that. And I think you touched upon an important point as we think about measurement. When we think about measurement here at American University, we have to think about both how we think we should measure and how the rest of the world also measures. Because we are part of a community of scholars. And so these questions, I think, are important, as you were reflecting, to be considered in the broader context as well. I think we want to answer the questions in terms of how we think about them specifically in our community and the community that we have created. But I think we also have to realize and recognize what's happening in the world around us, both in terms of change and not change, in terms of what that means for us and for our scholars that are here. Let's shift gears and go to the measurement of teaching, which, Angela, why don't we actually start with you on the teaching issue and how we should think about how do we measure teaching here at American University? How do we think about what is quality teaching and how we measure it?
So again, I think the way that we're currently measuring teaching is not perfect, and in many ways is flawed, but I think we do the best that we can. So there are teaching evaluations, and I think everybody in this room knows that there are problems with teaching evaluations, but I also think that by teaching evaluations, I mean student teaching evaluations. I think they're very important. I think it's very important to have student evaluations. However, we all know that sometimes some teachers get grade evaluations maybe because they don't grade as hard as others. Again, I think biases, gender and race biases come into play in the classroom oftentimes. There are women and people of color can be criticized for things that a white male professor would never be criticized for. So that happens with student evaluations. Yet at the same time, I think they're important. I don't think we should get rid of student evaluations because I think they're important. I think we have to figure out ways to address those flaws. I think peer evaluations are important, that we have experienced teachers coming into the classrooms of less experienced teachers, not in a judgmental way, but in a supportive way. And for younger teachers, inexperienced teachers to observe other teachers, I think that's important to do that as well. And so I think it's a combination of those things. I have to brag on my law school again to say that we really do value teaching because we have a series of pedagogy workshops that we do throughout the year, and they're well attended by all of our faculty, including our adjunct faculty. We live stream them, and lots of our adjuncts participate as well. And I think it's been very valuable in terms of developing the teaching of all of our faculty. So I think the current ways that we're measuring, I don't think we should get rid of them, but I think that we need to address the underlying flaws and problems with that, and I think that's still a work in progress.
Yes, I agree with Angela, and I would also add that we need to use the same, I don't think we need to get rid of the student evaluations, but we need to use them in a lesser extent. So by relying almost 100% on those evaluations, and I know the administration has moved into also taking other elements for, other means of instruments of evaluating, and it's not all 100%, but still the weight is too much on the SETs. What happens, if we think about teaching in a very holistic way, what happens in the classroom, but also what happens beyond the classroom, which is absolutely connected with what happens in the classroom, we need to find some kind of instruments that help to enhance that experience. So when we assess that experience, it's really much more, fair than what we have if we only had the students' evaluation. So I would just mention that the effort that is being currently done by the new task force to see other ways and to add more instruments for evaluating teaching. This effort is led by Max Friedman and Karen Baylor. The two of them are the co-chairs of, I think they're doing really a wonderful job in terms of trying to say, okay, we are not suggesting this has to just go, but maybe we can use it 50% and then add something else like peer class observation and peer reviews, and maybe a portfolio of teaching where you can express and you can put everything that you do. Because as I said, teaching is so much multi-dimensional experiences. Sometimes we might be thinking, okay, you go into the classroom and that's teaching, but we know that this is not the case. So we do have to find this. And I want to add, as a term faculty, that what happens, and I don't think it affects only term faculty, but if you have your job security sometimes in the line because your contracts are renewed periodically, but you don't have that tenure that gives some kind of comfort. I think we have to be very careful because it might hinder, people taking risks, people experimenting with new methods and with new courses. And I'm very happy to see that, for instance, I'm not sure whether it's only in the college, but also somewhere else. And now we can waive a course of the SETs if we think, okay, we want to do that and we want to experiment with this new course, and I don't want to have, an outcome through the SETs, which is not the one I desire, and this is going to, be in my file. So what I want to say is that, yes, I agree that instrument students' experience with us is important, but we definitely need to expand this.
Tony?
An advantage of going next to last is that everybody has said everything I want to say. But I had a conversation with Peter Starr when Peter came as dean, and I'm flipping it, Peter. Usually you give the story about me, I'm giving about you. And when I was chair, what I look for in faculty more than anything, I always hated when a faculty member would ask me, what am I going to have to teach? As opposed to what can I teach? And it was the idea of looking at someone approaching me with passion about, I hate to keep using the passion word, but that they wanted to do it, and that, and we don't, and we hire, I wanted to hire those sorts of people, as many of my colleagues did in the department, and individuals who want to develop and who want to progress and who want to be proactive in the department are the very ones that I wanted to have in the department, and usually you were right on those decisions, and I know that's the same way for some of your programs as well. I don't think we're going to resolve the metric for teaching up here in the remaining 2 or 3 minutes, but the fact that we continually look at this issue is heartening. We want to be able to measure good teaching. We want to be able to know who's going to be a good teacher and who's going to have good outcomes for that teaching. And I'm just talking about SCTs. I'm talking about students staying in majors, student following you in classes, student graduating, student getting good jobs. But to me, it really is, it's in your heart. Yeah, you really want to have to do it, and we got to be able to recognize those individuals. And the metric for it, I have no clue, unfortunately.
Thank you. Laura?
There's the short view, the long view, the medium view. I mean, the long view is the rising success of our students out in the world is speaking to our success in teaching. Just a shout out to Susan Zarinsky, who just got named the president of CBS News. We have incredible alumni, and they are connecting more and more to the university. And,
Golden Globe winner?
Golden Globe winner, right.
This week?
And I think the long view, we can measure things, we have to measure things in the long view as well as the short view. But I agree with what my colleagues have said about SETs. I decided to do a little experiment with my SETs 1 year. And I've done very well in the SETs, but I've noticed that there's this one category, and it's returns work back in a timely manner. And so I'm pretty good on that. So I decided I would try one semester to return things back the next day on everything, just to see if that would change that. It didn't change the score at all. It didn't. I mean, they live in such a spontaneous and instant gratification world that you can't you just can't help the students in that area. So that's a bias that students have. Okay, and I say that by way of the quantitative. We look at the quantitative numbers, and I think we should retain the SETs. I agree with everyone, but we look at the quantitative numbers, and it puts an objective spin on something that is very subjective. And we all have been in rooms where we can't say the bias exists out there and not in our own student body. It does exist. We're part of society, and we've been in rooms where a student will say, "Oh, hello, Professor Riley," and "Hello, Laura," right? And that continues to happen.
Happens with presidents in universities a lot.
President Burwell is on stage with us. That's right, President Burwell. And they'll say Sylvia. So this is something that is very real, and people of color experience it to a much greater extent. And studies about quantitative student evaluations certainly bear that out. So I'm glad that we're looking at it.
Thank you. Want to open this up for questions and comments you have. If you don't mind just introducing yourself, questions or comments, welcome them, and welcome to us all up here on the panel. Yes?
My name is Jessica Young. Can you hear me now? All right. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Health Studies. And my question to the panel is, how do you incorporate the scholar-teacher ideal outside of the classroom? So how do you see this playing out in the community, for example?
Anybody want to jump in?
So for me, I won't say that's what it's all about, but it's almost what it's all about for me, because as I mentioned before, what drove me to come to the academy is because of our criminal justice system, how broken it is, and me wanting to, instead of being a public defender every day representing people, I wanted to affect change in a much broader way. And I saw being a scholar and a teacher as a way of doing that, by being able to write, and not purposely and intentionally write scholarship for, and somebody mentioned the audience that you're writing for, or maybe that was in the session I was in earlier, I can't remember. And I write not just for other academics, but intentionally for criminal justice policymakers, practitioners, et cetera, because I'm trying to affect change. I mean, what you talk about passion, but what keeps me up at night is the fact that Black and brown people are being locked up disproportionately in this country every day, and that's what drives me. And so that comes through in my scholarship and in my teaching, but it also is what drives my service. I mentioned before that for us at the law school, it's about scholarship, teaching, and service. And so my service is about the work that I do outside. So if I had to describe myself, I don't know if I would describe myself as a scholar teacher, or maybe a scholar teacher activist, because I feel like for me, if I was not doing that, and if it wasn't going out there into the world, it wouldn't mean very much to me at all. And that maybe that's because of my particular area, but that's what it is for me.
Thank you. And one of the things, when you get this, I think everybody knows that the strategy, change makers for a changing world. And it is the idea, and just having, as I went through this whole process of, entering into the university and asking questions and hearing just this concept that is a constant drumbeat about change making. And whether it is in the arts, or it is at Kogod, or is the School of International Service, or the law school, or SBL, the College of Arts and Sciences, and what those rats mean, in terms of the change that they're going to help produce in terms of what we do. It's just a constant theme here. And I think what we have to figure out is how we think about, to the point of your question, how we measure and think about things and incorporating them, because it is what drives so many people who are here at this university, our faculty, our students, and our staff, in terms of why people come here and why people stay here. In terms of what they want to and can do.
Can I add just one more thing that I forgot to say that's equally as important? I was talking about my scholarship, but really it's what Laura said before and what President Burwell said, Professor DeNardis and President Burwell.
All we're asking is, I think Laura's point was consistency. It was consistency. Okay. So Sylvia, Laura, Tony, yeah, we're all good. We're all
Sylvia
good.
and Laura, okay. is the teaching part. I was talking about the scholarship, but the teaching part, because I think it is important. When you see people becoming the president, the head of CBS News, or when we see our students out there in the world affecting change, that's a big part of it too. So for me, to see my students and to help students go out there and become public defenders and become progressive prosecutors affecting change, that is extremely fulfilling as well. So it's not just the scholarship and the services, the teaching as well, in terms of where they go when they leave here and what they do in making an impact on the world. And that, for me, has been one of the most fulfilling things in my work.
May I add something?
Yes.
Very briefly, I just wanted to add that I know you mentioned, the community beyond the university, but I also wanted to mention that the community has also been incorporated in some courses, like the community-based courses, that I think we need to acknowledge, because it's been, I think, a quite successful enterprise, and it's going on, and it's just, so in that sense, I wanted to add this.
Other questions? Yes.
Distinguished faculty, President Burwell. Okay. I'm John Yonner, adjunct instructor from the School of Communications, Public Speaking, and I have a selfish question. This is my third semester, and President Burwell, your article in Foreign Affairs was very helpful on the anxiety issue. So I threw in the face of my students how my job is there to stress them out a little. But, and I only ask this half facetiously, but what I've been stunned with is, and I say this as an old white guy from New England who, if we had emotions, we never talked about them, but these students are very forthcoming in a way that surprised me, which is fine, but so the myth about them being fragile, I found them to be quite resilient. But if you could talk with your experience how to not pander, but still push them and stress them, because I told them I was going to bring a discomfort dog into class. But anyway, I've been taken aback by how open they are and actually how resilient they are and supportive of each other, because they've talked about Parkland. I've had students, victims of sexual assault, and talked about it, who suffer from depression and talked about it. So that would selfishly help me.
Do any of you all want to, or do you want me to?
Well, I'm being poked here, so I think it's because I'm a psychologist. I almost had to do this.
Told you those rats are helpful.
I teach a course called Drugs and Behavior and neuropharmacology class, and so I get countless drug stories, and sometimes ask me if I would like to go and use them with them, and I have to let them know, no, that's probably not a good idea. But
That's good, Tony.
Yeah,
it's good. Good. I'm glad about that.
I understand the rules here. But it's tough because when students approach me about issues about their use of drugs or their problems with drugs, and I know the trajectory of drug use, it puts you in a bind as to what to do. I mean, I can't hire university officials and relay these stories to them. They tell me this in confidence. But I now do in fact refer these students to the next level for student safety issues when they come to that, because it's a real issue. Several years ago, we lost 2 young people to opioid overdose, and where, as a matter of fact, SPA is holding a special symposium in February 22nd. On opioid epidemic is going to be discussed. But it's an issue in terms of how you press and what you listen to and how you interact them. But it's a fragile situation. I can't speak for my clinical colleagues like Tony and some others here, but students probably approach them as well about clinical issues, and what you have to do is just know the next level of safety that you can put these students. I don't know if I'm answering your question there or not. I don't have someone shaking their head no back there. I'm not answering it. But I'm doing my damnedest. That's all I can tell you.
So I guess I'll jump in here with you, Tony, since I did write the piece. I think I would say the stress, anxiety, and depression that our students come with is greater than it was, say, when when folks started, so let's just say 10 years ago, that the stress, anxiety, and depression, and in terms of our campus numbers, and I'm looking around, Vanta in the house, Tracy's in the house, Tracy's right here, but our numbers with regard to those who are seeking support and help for behavioral issues continues to climb. We have added to our counselors and our ability to do it. We've added more appointments. We add everything, and the numbers continue to climb. And one of the things that is just a point of fact is you all, the faculty, are kind of the front line in terms of what you're saying. And what's an interesting thing is I'm not certain that one can equate talking about something with dealing with something. It is one step, and an important step, and thank heavens that they're willing to actually broach it with you. But like that broaching it with you, similarly to what Tony is describing, unless we get them the next step of help they need, and there's more and more of that. And many of you all, just as Laura's like, I was never trained to get in front, I had to just get up in front of it. It's not like we've spent a whole lot of time helping you recognize things that might be substance abuse or things that might be mental health issues, and your ability to distinguish between that which is extremely severe, danger to yourself, danger to others, from something that may be an acute episode that they just need something to work through. And so I think your question, I just think, is so indicative of what we have to do as a university, which is how are we helping you know what to do with this? Like, I'm glad to hear that our students are coming to you and telling you things that you're like, man, I never would have talked about that with anybody. That is where we want to be, but we've got to get to the next step where that first conversation and that bringing it to you gets it to the next level of being addressed, because there's more and more. We're very fortunate this year. We've had fewer alcohol transports, okay? And that is just for what that means for the institution. So we're clear, somebody drinks enough alcohol that we have to hospitalize them. And the number of times, how many times this is happening, that's a little bit down. But I'll be honest and say drinking and alcohol consumption is up in terms of what we find in the residence halls and our number of students who are seeking behavioral health issues. The number of students with suicidal ideation, I am thinking about harming myself in a serious way, has gone up. And so these are the things, and I think one of the things this reflects to me that I think we need to figure out how to do a better job of is making sure you all know it anecdotally because you're in the classroom, so you experience it that way, but I'm not sure you experience it and know what the numbers are and the aggregate, and we need to make sure that we're sharing that with you and thinking about how to work with you and give you tools to help figure this out, because you are the front lines and you are part of the solution. So, and we can't, and I know that's asking, you're like, I'm part of the solution. I got to produce articles that get published, and I got to do service, and I got to do great in the day. But what we have to do is, I think about how we think about these pieces together, which is why we're having these conversations. Yes?
Hi, I'm Andrew Taylor. I'm on Faculty Arts Management, Chair of the Department of Performing Arts. And I guess I'm curious for your experience, but it strikes me we have a pretty good tenure review and promotion. It's not great, it's got lots of flaws, but we generally understand it has something to do with the quality of the venue and the channel through which your scholarship is flowing. It has something to do with the nature and significance of your own contribution, and it has something to do with a critical reaction either by your peers or by newspapers. So it has those sort of things. And I think we already have, at least from my experience from previous institutions, a much more broad and robust understanding of scholarship here. So I'm curious, it feels like AU, and we have all these people that show up when we are worried about our syllabi, to learn about teaching. So we have an extraordinary foot up, and I'm curious if the panel has a perspective on where we are in relation to peer institutions. I feel like we're actually pretty high in our broad and thoughtful understanding of scholarship. We're a little bit anemic in our review and understanding of how we understand teaching, although that's just me. So I'm just curious whether we have a sense of where AU is and how we might build on the strength and sort of counterbalance the weaknesses?
I honestly am not sure how we hold up relative to other institutions. That's not something that I have looked at, but I have looked at the evolution within American University over time, and I think that if I wear another hat, and that's Associate Dean of Faculty Affairs at SOC, and I think that we have gone a long way in having clarity in what the guidelines are, and but also allowing individuals the opportunity to make the case for themselves about what their productivity impact and their accomplishments have been. The teaching part is very hard. We rely heavily on the SETs, across the institution, and are always trying to figure out other ways. But I think that's an area of improvement, to figure out how do you measure that. Service, very easy to measure, that's not a problem. Any other insights?
I will say, I think we do pretty well as compared to other institutions, and I'm speaking from perspective of law schools, and our law school as compared to other law schools. So, we have these, we tell people when they start there's 3 things that you have to do, sort of your job description: scholarship, teaching, and service. And what we say to them, when I say we, I mean in the legal academy in general, all over, we say, and they're all 3 equally important. Well, they should be, but the fact of the matter is that in every law school, they're not valued equally. I would say that in law school, scholarship is absolutely valued more than teaching, and certainly more than service. And I think that's wrong. I definitely think that's wrong. I certainly think that teaching and scholarship should be valued equally. And I'm proud to say at our law school, I believe we do a better job of that than most law schools. We value teaching in all the ways that I mentioned before, in terms of the resources we put into it, the workshops, the mentoring, et cetera. But in the academy in general, in the legal academy in general, I see countless situations where someone is a fantastic teacher, but where their particular faculty they think that their scholarship was quote unquote up to par, and they would not be promoted or tenured. But if they're, quite frankly, mediocre to bad teachers, as long as they're producing a lot of scholarship, they would be promoted and get tenure. And I think that's absolutely wrong and unfair. Teaching absolutely should be as important, if not more important, in an institution that is an educational institution of higher learning. It's about the students. In my personal opinion, that's what it is first and foremost about. I think that should be first and foremost, but I don't see in the academy in general, that's definitely not the case. People become, and I think all of us, we didn't have teaching experience. I didn't have teaching experience really that much before I started teaching, and we hire people who've never taught, and we don't pay attention to that. But as long as they got 4 or 5 law review articles, that's all we're focused on, and that's wrong. I think that's a flaw in the legal academy. I can't say that's happening in all other schools and colleges, but in general in this country, that's happening in the legal academy, and I'm proud to say at our law school, not so much. I still think we value scholarship more than teaching, even in our law school, but I think we don't have that problem as much as in the academy in general.
Can I add one thing to that? I think I agree with both of these, that I think our guidelines and criteria are articulated well, and they're fluid. I mean, they change depending upon the years. But I think more important than the criteria are the fact that in the last strategic plan, we made a list of things that we thought would bring people up to a high level of productivity of scholarship and a high level of productivity in teaching. And we now do them all. I was amazed at that when I went back and reflected that. And like the mentorship programs and the resources and the infrastructure, things have really dramatically changed, I think, over the last 10 years or so. And with those things in place, it gives opportunities and options for doing the types of things that should be required for tenure and promotion, as well as scholar-teacher ideal issues.
I think we have time for one more question.
I'll try and keep this brief, but it's not going to be. So I'm Betsy Cohn. I'm just being Betsy Cohn, and I think a lot about teaching. And so I would like to throw out a few ideas about, as we think more broadly and about how we can evaluate teaching. what about, on an individual level, alumni office asks the alumni that they meet with for the faculty members who have had an impact on their lives, asking that out 5 years, 10 years, so that it's not just who becomes the CEO of an organization, but that someone is still be remembered for that course. We can look at the number of emails. In fact, put it on your FARs that I've gotten this number of emails from my former students this year telling me the impact that I had in their lives, or that they want to chat with me about some book or article they read that's related to the course content. I mean, I think that we really need to sort of broaden this idea, and that it's qualitative, but it can be measured. So that's sort of the individual kind of ways in which we can think more broadly beyond just the immediate. And then I want to address John's really great questions and Sylvia's response, which is at an institutional level. I've been teaching since 1995, and I think a lot about teaching. My teaching has changed in the last few years. It's had to change because our student body has changed. So I think there needs to be something in there on an individual level, which is how has your teaching changed in the last few years? And to ask faculty to reflect on that, and if they don't have something to fill into that box on the FARs, then maybe that they need to come and think more about that. So I will add to that on an institutional level that the term faculty are taking the brunt of the student contact hours, and the amount of work that goes into now teaching is much greater than it used to be. And so at an institutional level, I would challenge the university to think about the way in which the kind of support that we are giving to term faculty, also the kind of load. Could we offer term faculty a sabbatical or a course reduction for a semester, some number of years, so that they can recharge in their pedagogy or in their course content because of the amount of time it takes to prepare courses and to teach our students well. So those are just some of the ideas. I got lots more. But I'll stop in the interest of time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I want to first thank our panelists, both for serving on the panel, but what you do every day in terms of the work in both scholarship and research as well as in teaching. And thanks to all of you all. When I just close with also, as we're thinking about the strategy is rolling out on Tuesday, so folks will be seeing that. We are in the middle of our budget process. Just want to flag that for everyone. Hopefully you've been able to attend some of the sessions that we've done at the schools. Mary and Doug have been to all of school. How many meetings have you all done, Mary? 18 different briefings, but who is counting? And Dan is smiling because those 18 meetings are done. In terms of making sure that we are having more transparency, because I think it's very important for the whole everyone to try and understand, what we're facing and how we need to think together about our budget and that sort of thing. We also will be having the 1-year anniversary of our inclusive excellence work. Very important work that it's been a year. We said we would come back and report. You'll be seeing that in the next 3 weeks. The other thing you'll be seeing in the next week is the announcement of our SIGN Fellows, the first class of fellows that will be coming to the university-wide SIGN Institute of Policy and Politics to bring folks here to do seminars, and also so that our faculty as well as our students can have access to incredible practitioners from all different areas and walks and points of view and that sort of thing. So lots of big things coming up that I hope you'll look forward to. And I did want to close our meeting, or my part of our panel, with a haiku that I wrote this morning on this topic. And if our College of Arts and Sciences people can please not judge. This should not be peer-reviewed. Learning is the heart, scholarship, the arteries. On both we depend. And with that, I will turn it back to Kehoe.
Just a couple of quick announcements for the afternoon. Thank you again, President Burwell and the panelists, for a wonderful discussion. I know that this is something that we'll continue to talk about, and I would welcome your thoughts and ideas so that the work of the CTRL can continue on this regard. A quick reminder, there is a dessert reception after the afternoon session starting at 4 p.m. We have two very special guests, musical performers, Nancy Snyder from the School of Performing Arts and Laura DeNardis will be playing her classical guitar. So never mind the desserts, come for the music and for prizes. And so, as I mentioned before, your name tags, if you look at the back of it, there'll be a barcode. We know where you are now. But we will be using this for the raffling and giving away of prizes. And so please join us at 4 o'clock. Have a wonderful rest of the afternoon, and we'll see you in the tavern at 4.